Welcome back to the channel. I'm Kevin, and today I am making Baruka's Dagger from Solo Leveling for a third time, which I promise isn't nearly as crazy as it sounds. You see, I started reading the Solo Leveling webtoon when there were maybe a dozen chapters translated. I made this dagger for the first time about 4 years ago, right at the height of COVID, and it was the fourth ever project I posted on this channel. It's kind of crazy to look back on this because I made this in OpenSCAD, which is a CAD software which is definitely not meant for making cosplay props. I did this with sine functions and for loops, so if you actually look at the model itself, you'll see all the little individual layers. I am horrified I ever went for that approach, but it worked, kinda, and that was version 1. A couple years later, I decided I wanted to learn Blender, and decided to do it by making every single dagger from the Solo Leveling webtoon, which was a lot of fun and turned out to be a great way to learn a new software. The results were better because Blender was a much better choice for modeling this, but I was still very new to it and was figuring things out. The design I see in the anime seemed different enough that it was worth remaking this. I was also genuinely curious about how it would turn out. Since the last time I made this, I've gone from a printer I built myself from kit to a Bamboo P1P, which can do much better quality prints. I've also been consistently working in Blender and have about 3 more years of experience, so this seemed like a great way to see how my current skills stack up to me from a couple of years ago. I started in the same way I always have, by opening up GIMP and editing together a few reference images. The main one I'm using is from the end of Season 2, Episode 2, where they pan over this with the camera. So all the pieces were there, I just need to stitch together a few screenshots. I also traced some of the key details. This is partly to help me think through how I'm going to construct this, but it's also a helpful reminder for when I'm actually working on this in Blender. There have been more times than I want to admit where I've been so into modeling something that I forget to add certain details, which is always embarrassing. I outlined the rough blade with a plane, which I then extruded. This looks pretty rough, but by creasing certain edges and adding a subdivision surface modifier, it starts curving beautifully. For anyone who's interested, this is roughly what a cross-section of the blade looks like at this point. I find that cosplay props really don't need a sharp edge, so I always go with a flat edge because it's easier to print and more resistant to damage when you're finishing this. Once I get every aspect of the blade just the way I want it, I can mirror this and it's pretty much ready to go. Tweaking the blade took me probably another hour or so. Most of that time was spent trying to get it to taper nicely at the points. I'll be the first to admit that a lot of this tweaking was kind of silly. If you're putting this on a shelf or using this as a cosplay prop, a couple of millimeters here and there really isn't going to matter. The hardest part for me was actually the handle. The curves made it look fatter and skinnier at certain points, which I really didn't like and spent a lot of time fiddling with. I divided this up by using cubes with an intersect modifier. I positioned these so all of the details on the hilt would be in one seamless piece, and I made sure that all the joins would be in areas where I could pretty easily cover them up. When I first started, I would add a channel in between the pieces I was printing, so that when I was gluing them together, I could put a bit of broken nail between them to keep everything aligned during gluing, which was kind of a good idea, but a very crude execution. Over the last year or so, I've been transitioning to a tongue and groove approach, which is actually included in the models. I definitely haven't perfected this, but I do think it's a step in the right direction. I printed this with the optimal setting, which has a 0.16mm layer height, which is so much better than what my last printer could do. These looked really great right out of the printer, especially compared to the last 2 times I made this. I used superglue to attach the pieces together. I ended up wedging this into an old cup filled with pens to keep it upright while the glue dried. About an hour later, I came back and glued on another piece, and so on. I went out to my garage and did some light sanding with my Dremel tool. This was focused on the joins between the pieces, and I was looking to get a nice scuff texture across the entire join. This all went together pretty well, but even a 0.5 millimeter offset can kinda wreck the look of a blade. You don't have to use a Dremel tool in this, or even sand it at all, but it does make the next step a lot easier. I covered the joins and rough spots with some wood filler, which I let dry overnight. The next day, I came back and did some hand sanding to create a smooth surface. I could have still done this even without sanding beforehand. It just would have taken more wood filler to smooth everything over. I sprayed most of this with some automotive primer. I left myself a little area to hold on one end and used some painter's tape to create a nice loop so I could hang this up to dry afterwards. Spray-on primer really highlights areas that need more work, so I always try to get the joins, rough areas, and anything else I'm not sure about in the first pass. This lets me go back and do some more sanding and sometimes even add more wood filler. Once I was ready, I held the dagger by the other end and did another pass with the primer. I quite like this approach because it lets me prime the entire prop in just 2 sessions, while also giving me 2 shots at the most problematic areas. I used to prime everything before going back and doing the sanding and additional wood filler, before priming absolutely everything again. This approach pretty much gives me the same results, but in fewer steps. That means I can move on to the painting faster, which I generally really enjoy. There's something special about watching this gray, lifeless thing going to being this vibrant prop in just a few sittings. I applied a base coat of matte acrylic paint for the lighter colors. I really should have applied 2 coats, but this was fine. I ended up doing 2 coats of the final color, which was probably 30 to 50% folk art metallic paint mixed with normal cheap matte acrylic paint. It's not as striking with the lighter colors, but I do find adding metallic paints really helps make the darker colors pop. I kept on painting, and over the course of an afternoon, I pretty much finished this. I sprayed this with some clear gloss sealer to finish it off. If you've made it this far, I hope you'll like, subscribe, and do all the other stuff the YouTube algorithm likes to see. I really do love making this stuff and sharing it with as many people as possible, so that little bit of extra engagement from all of you really does make a difference. With that obligatory plug out of the way, here's the final result. I'm really happy with this. I have a lot of affection for the past builds, because they really did represent the best I could do at those points in time, but this one, it shows me how far I've progressed. I think one of my greatest strengths and greatest weaknesses is that I'm a really ambitious hobbyist. The moment I improve at something, I am planning larger, more elaborate, more challenging projects. That's exactly what led me to making a 6-foot glowing staff last month. I think doing a project like this every once in a while is really good for me, because it shows me in concrete terms how much I've improved over the last few years. I'll post Amazon affiliate links to all the products I used in this video in the video description down below. I'll also put links to all the files for this dagger in case you want to make your own. Leave me a comment if you have any questions, and I'll see you all again next time with another project.